Clara, the widow of a billionaire, hires Jack, the gardener, to be her date for a charity event. What happened next left everyone in shock. What started as a simple arrangement for a gala quickly took an unexpected turn, but no one could have predicted what happened next. Are you ready for the shocking truth? Before we continue, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching the video from. And don't forget to subscribe. Clara stood in the opulent living room of her sprawling estate, a space that had once been filled with laughter, love, and the comforting presence of her late husband. Now, it felt like a gilded cage, each piece of luxurious furniture and every piece of artwork a reminder of the life she had lost. The high ceilings loomed above her, adorned with intricate moldings and sparkling chandeliers, casting a glow that felt both inviting and suffocating. She absent-mindedly traced the edge of the marble fireplace, her fingers grazing the cool surface, lost in thought. The air was thick with the scent of fresh lilies, a floral tribute to her husband that she had insisted on keeping despite the bittersweet memories they conjured. At 50, Clara felt adrift in a world that had once seemed so secure. After the sudden passing of her husband, the billionaire magnate whose name had been synonymous with power and success, she found herself grappling with the expectations of her social circle. Each day seemed to echo with the whispers of her late husband's legacy, and the burden of maintaining that status weighed heavily on her shoulders. Clara's wealth, once a source of pride, now felt like an anchor, dragging her deeper into a sea of despair. She glanced around the room, taking stock of the lavish decor. The plush sofas, the ornate rugs, and the shelves lined with trophies and accolades. All of it felt like a facade, a glittering veneer that masked her profound loneliness. As she moved through the space, memories flooded her mind. Family gatherings, extravagant parties, and the warmth of her husband's embrace. The laughter of her grandchildren echoed faintly in her ears, a sound that had become a rare commodity in her life. Clara sighed, a deep, shuddering breath that betrayed the turmoil within her. She had been thrust into a role she never anticipated, navigating the treacherous waters of widowhood while grappling with the expectations of a society that thrived on appearances. The realization that she was now the matriarch of her family, responsible for upholding their legacy while mourning her own loss, felt overwhelmingly daunting. In the weeks that had followed her husband's passing, Clara had become a ghost in her own home, wandering the halls like a shadow. Friends began to call less frequently, their visits replaced by polite messages and perfunctory invitations to gatherings. The socialite women who had once been her confidants now seemed to view her with a mix of sympathy and trepidation, as if her grief might be contagious. Clara found herself withdrawing, retreating into the sanctuary of her home, where she could hide from the world outside. Yet, the solitude was suffocating, and the silence echoed louder than any conversation. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, casting long shadows across the polished floors, Clara received an unexpected call from one of her closest friends, Vivian. The woman's voice was bright and insistent, urging Clara to attend the upcoming charity gala that had become a staple in their social calendar. Clara felt a twinge of annoyance at the suggestion. The idea of donning an elegant gown and mingling with the elite felt like an insurmountable task. Yet, Vivian was relentless, her words a blend of concern and encouragement that made it difficult for Clara to decline. The gala, an annual event aimed at raising funds for various charitable causes, was a focal point in their social circle. Clara could almost hear the clinking of champagne glasses and the hum of laughter that would fill the grand ballroom. The thought of attending sent a wave of anxiety rushing through her. She envisioned the probing questions from acquaintances, the forced smiles, and the underlying currents of judgment that accompanied every interaction. But Vivian's insistence ignited a flicker of defiance within Clara. Perhaps attending the gala would serve as a distraction, a chance to momentarily escape the weight of her grief and the expectations that surrounded her. As the days passed, Clara found herself caught in a whirlwind of preparations. The gala would require her to present a polished version of herself, a woman who had it all together despite the cracks that lay just beneath the surface. She rummaged through her expansive wardrobe, selecting a gown that had once made her feel invincible. It was a deep emerald green, a color that accentuated her eyes, and she hoped it would evoke a sense of confidence that had long eluded her. Yet, with every piece of jewelry she adorned, every brush of makeup that transformed her reflection, Clara felt a growing sense of dissonance. She was playing a role, stepping into a character that no longer felt like her own. Unbeknownst to her, as Clara prepared for the gala, the notion of hiring a date began to take shape in her mind. Vivian had suggested it as a way to deflect unwanted attention from her widowhood, a strategy to navigate the social landscape with a buffer. The idea felt both absurd and appealing, an opportunity to reclaim some semblance of normalcy. Clara had never been one to seek companionship in such a manner, but desperation often led people to make unexpected choices. She found herself contemplating the possibility of hiring a gardener, someone who could accompany her, yet remain an outsider to the intricate web of her social world. It was in this moment of contemplation that she decided to reach out to a local gardening service, hoping to find someone who could meet her unconventional request. The thought of hiring a gardener as a date was both humorous and liberating. Clara chuckled softly to herself, envisioning the reactions of her friends when they discovered her unique choice. Perhaps this would be her way of rebelling against the suffocating expectations that surrounded her. On the day of the gala, Clara's mind was a flurry of emotions as she awaited the arrival of Jack, the gardener she had hired. She had received a brief confirmation from him, a man in his mid-40s who had come highly recommended for his expertise and charm. As she stood in front of the ornate mirror, adjusting her hair and ensuring that every detail was perfect, Clara felt a mixture of excitement and trepidation. What kind of man would he be? Would he fit into her world, or would their differences only serve to highlight her own insecurities? When the doorbell rang, Clara's heart raced. She smoothed the fabric of her gown, taking a deep breath before stepping into the foyer. As she opened the door, she was met with an unexpected sight. Jack stood before her, a man with sun-kissed skin and calloused hands that told stories of hard work and resilience. His attire was simple yet appropriate, a crisp shirt, fitted trousers, and a nervous smile that suggested he was as apprehensive about this arrangement as she was. Jack's eyes widened as he took in the grandeur of Clara's home, his expression a mix of awe and disbelief. The lavishness of the estate contrasted starkly with his own modest lifestyle, and Clara could sense the discomfort radiating from him. She attempted to ease the tension with a smile, but the atmosphere was thick with an unspoken awkwardness. As they exchanged pleasantries, Clara felt an unexpected connection forming, a shared understanding of the roles they were both playing in this strange arrangement. The initial moments were filled with hesitance, each of them navigating the unfamiliar territory of their partnership. Clara noticed the way Jack shifted on his feet, his body language suggesting he was straddling two worlds. He was a gardener, a man who found solace in nurturing plants, yet here he was, standing in a world of wealth and privilege that felt foreign to him. Clara, too, felt the weight of her surroundings, the opulence that seemed to mock her vulnerability. In that brief exchange, they both recognized the absurdity of their situation, yet also the potential for something deeper, a connection born out of shared struggles and unexpected circumstances. As they prepared to leave, Clara felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps this evening would not be just a facade. Perhaps it would be an opportunity to discover more about herself and the world around her. Little did they know, their lives were about to intertwine in ways neither could have anticipated, setting the stage for a journey that would challenge their perceptions of love, loss, and the bonds that connect them all. The days leading up to the charity gala were filled with a mix of anticipation and dread. Clara stood in front of the floor-length mirror in her bedroom, adjusting the neckline of her elegant gown. The fabric shimmered under the soft glow of the chandelier, casting intricate patterns of light across the room. She had chosen a deep emerald green, a color that complemented her pale skin and dark hair. Yet, as she turned this way and that, admiring the silhouette, a sense of unease washed over her. This dress, this occasion, it all felt like a masquerade, a performance where she was expected to don a mask of confidence and grace while her heart felt heavy with sorrow. Jack was in the living room, trying to shake off the nerves that had settled in his stomach like a stubborn weight. He had rented a suit for the occasion, a modest black number that seemed to swallow him whole. The fabric felt foreign against his skin, and he fidgeted with the collar, which felt too tight, a constant reminder of how out of place he was in this world of wealth and glamour. He had spent most of his life surrounded by dirt and plants, the solace of nature far removed from the opulence that Clara inhabited. Yet here he was, stepping into that world, and it both thrilled and terrified him. They had spent the previous evening practicing small talk, each of them revealing bits of themselves in a way that highlighted their contrasting lives. Clara recounted tales of lavish parties and the societal obligations that weighed heavily on her shoulders, her voice laced with an undercurrent of vulnerability that Jack had not expected. He listened intently, his heart aching for her. Clara, the widow of a powerful man, was trapped in a gilded cage, and she wore her loneliness like a second skin. Jack, in turn, shared snippets of his life. A childhood spent in a modest home, the struggles of adulthood, and the pride he took in his work as a gardener. He described how the earth felt beneath his hands, the joy of nurturing life from the soil, and how it was a stark contrast to the sterile environment of the gala they were to attend. Clara found herself captivated by his words, his passion for the simple things in life, offering her a glimpse of a reality far removed from her own. As the evening of the gala approached, Clara's anxiety mingled with excitement. She felt the weight of expectation pressing down on her, the need to present herself as a strong, composed figure to the world. Yet, in the quiet moments before the event, her fears bubbled to the surface. What if she faltered? What if, in the midst of the laughter and glitz, her grief bubbled over, exposing her vulnerability to the very society that had come to expect her to be untouchable? Jack sensed her trepidation, his own heart racing as the time to leave drew near. They had agreed to arrive together, an unconventional pairing that would raise eyebrows but also provided a sense of comfort to Clara. As he watched her prepare, he was struck by how beautiful she looked, not just in her gown but in the way she exuded a quiet strength, even amidst her uncertainties. Finally, they stepped into the car, the driver clad in a crisp uniform, his demeanor professional and detached. As they drove through the glittering streets, the city lights twinkled like stars, illuminating the path to the grand venue. Clara stared out the window, lost in thought, while Jack sat beside her, acutely aware of the world outside their bubble. He felt the weight of his rented suit, a symbol of his temporary status in a realm that felt foreign and intimidating. Upon their arrival, Clara's breath caught in her throat at the sight of the venue. The grand building was adorned with flowers and lights, creating an atmosphere of elegance and extravagance. As they stepped out of the car, the cameras flashed, capturing their entrance for the world to see. Clara straightened her posture, instinctively slipping into the persona she had crafted over the years. Jack, on the other hand, felt the pang of discomfort in his chest, the flashbulbs feeling like spotlights on a stage where he did not belong. They entered the gala, the sound of laughter and clinking glasses enveloping them. Clara, despite her swirling emotions, managed to engage with the guests, her smile bright and her laughter genuine. Jack, however, lingered slightly behind, observing the interactions, feeling like an outsider peering into a world that thrived on wealth and status. Yet, as Clara moved through the crowd, she kept glancing back at him, an unspoken connection grounding her amidst the chaos. As the evening progressed, Clara and Jack found themselves on the dance floor. The music swelled, filling the space with a romantic melody that enveloped them like a warm embrace. Clara took Jack's hand, guiding him into the rhythm of the dance, their bodies moving in sync despite the unconventionality of their pairing. In that moment, the noise of the gala faded into the background, and it felt as if they were in a world of their own. Jack's heart raced as he held Clara close, feeling the warmth radiating from her. He had never imagined himself in such a position, dancing with a woman of her stature, their lives so starkly different yet somehow intertwined in this moment. Clara's laughter bubbled up, a sound so genuine that it brought a smile to his face. For a fleeting moment, the pressures of the night receded, and they lost themselves in the music, each step on the dance floor weaving their lives closer together. But just as the evening seemed to take a turn for the better, Clara's phone buzzed insistently in her purse. She hesitated, torn between the joyous moment with Jack and the nagging urgency of the call. When she finally reached for her phone and glanced at the screen, her heart plummeted. It was her daughter, and the frantic tone of the message sent a chill down her spine. Jack noticed the shift in her demeanor, the way her smile faltered and her eyes widened with concern. He instinctively stepped closer, sensing that something was wrong. Clara's fingers trembled as she answered the call, and the words that followed shattered the fragile bubble of happiness they had shared. Her granddaughter, Lily, had fallen gravely ill, and she needed to get to the hospital immediately. The mood in the ballroom shifted palpably, the laughter and chatter fading into a dull roar as Clara's world tilted on its axis. She turned to Jack, her eyes filled with a mix of fear and disbelief. Without a word, he nodded, understanding the urgency of the situation. They left the gala behind, stepping back into the night, the dazzling lights of the event dimming in the distance, leaving behind the echoes of laughter that now felt distant and hollow. As they sped towards the hospital, Clara's heart raced with dread. Her mind raced with thoughts of Lily, her sweet, vibrant granddaughter who had always brought light into her life. The thought of her suffering was unbearable. Jack sat beside her, a quiet strength emanating from him, his presence grounding her amidst the whirlwind of emotions. In those moments of uncertainty, as the city blurred past, Clara realized how much she had come to rely on Jack. Despite their differences, he had become a steadying force in her life, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there was a flicker of hope. She squeezed her eyes shut, taking a deep breath, trying to gather the fragments of her shattered composure. The night was far from over, and she had no idea what awaited her at the hospital, but she knew she wouldn't face it alone. In the sterile, brightly lit corridors of the hospital, Clara felt as though she were moving through a dream, one that had turned into a nightmare. The air was thick with antiseptic and the muffled sounds of medical equipment, and each step she took felt heavier than the last. The stark white walls seemed to close in on her, amplifying the sense of dread that hung in the pit of her stomach. Clara's heart raced as she clutched the fabric of her tailored coat, a remnant of the elegant life she had once known. Now, that life felt like a distant memory, overshadowed by the grim reality of her granddaughter's health. The doctors had gathered in a small conference room, their expressions grave as they delivered the news. Clara listened numbly as they explained the precarious state of Lily's health, the words bone marrow transplant echoing in her mind like a haunting refrain. She struggled to process the information, the urgency of their tone pressing down on her like a weight she could hardly bear. Her granddaughter, vibrant and full of life just days ago, was now fighting for her future, and Clara felt a profound helplessness wash over her. After the meeting, Clara wandered the sterile halls, her mind racing with thoughts of Lily. She remembered the laughter they had shared, the countless afternoons spent reading stories and baking cookies. Now, those memories felt like cruel reminders of what was at stake. The doctors had spoken with clinical precision about potential matches and the importance of finding a donor quickly, but Clara's mind couldn't focus on the logistics. All she could think about was the fragility of life and how quickly everything could change. As she stood by a large window overlooking the hospital's courtyard, Clara watched the world outside move on, oblivious to her turmoil. Children played in the grass, their laughter ringing out like a melody, while parents chatted, their lives seemingly untroubled. Clara felt a pang of envy. How could they be so carefree while her heart was shattering into a million pieces? The realization that she might lose Lily, her beloved granddaughter, sent waves of despair crashing over her. Eventually, she found herself back in the hospital room where Lily lay, small and fragile against the backdrop of sterile sheets and medical equipment. The sight of her granddaughter, once so full of energy and laughter, now so pale and still, tore at Clara's heart. She reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from Lily's forehead, feeling the coolness of her skin. Clara whispered a soft promise to herself. She would do everything in her power to save her. But as she sat there, enveloped in the silence of the room, Clara felt the weight of her financial resources and social connections dissolve into insignificance. In that moment, all that mattered was the life of her granddaughter. With a heavy heart, Clara made her way home. The drive felt interminable, each passing moment magnifying the distance between her and her family. Her mansion, once a symbol of her success, now felt like a gilded cage. Upon entering, she was immediately struck by the stark contrast of her lavish surroundings and the turmoil she felt within. The opulence that had surrounded her life seemed hollow now, a facade that could not mask the chaos in her heart. As she stepped inside, Clara was surprised to find Jack waiting in the expansive living room, an unexpected presence in her carefully curated world. He stood by the window, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his rented suit, a look of concern etched across his face. The sight of him, rugged and unrefined against the backdrop of her luxurious home, was oddly comforting. In that moment, Clara felt a flicker of warmth, a reminder that she was not entirely alone in this fight. Jack turned to her as she entered, his expression shifting to one of empathy as he took in her disheveled appearance. Clara felt the weight of her sorrow pressing down on her shoulders, and for the first time since Lily's diagnosis, she allowed herself to break. Tears welled in her eyes, and she sank onto the plush sofa, burying her face in her hands. Jack approached slowly, his presence grounding her in a way that she hadn't anticipated. He did not speak, allowing her to cry without the pressure of words. As the tears streamed down her cheeks, Clara felt a strange sense of release. The raw emotion that had been pent up inside her found an outlet, and with each sob, she felt a little lighter. It was as though Jack's silent support gave her permission to grieve, to feel the weight of her fears without holding them back. The vulnerability of the moment was both terrifying and liberating, and Clara found herself grateful for Jack's quiet strength. As the tears streamed down her cheeks, Clara felt a strange sense of release. The raw emotion that had been pent up inside her found an outlet, and with each sob, she felt a little lighter. It was as though Jack's silent support gave her permission to grieve, to feel the weight of her fears without holding them back. The vulnerability of the moment was both terrifying and liberating, and Clara found herself grateful for Jack's quiet strength. Eventually, she composed herself, wiping her eyes and taking a shaky breath. Jack settled beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. In the silence that followed, Clara began to share the details of her granddaughter's illness, her voice tremulous but resolute. She spoke of the doctors, the procedures, and the desperate need for a bone marrow donor. With each word, she felt the burden of her worries lift slightly, as though the act of sharing made them less daunting. Jack listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. Clara could see that he was genuinely invested in her pain, his own heart aching for the little girl he had never met. It was a strange connection, born from shared grief and the unspoken understanding that sometimes the weight of the world was too heavy to bear alone. Clara realized that in sharing her story, she was allowing Jack to step into her life in a way that felt both foreign and comforting. As the conversation flowed, Clara found herself opening up about her past, her struggles navigating a world of wealth and expectation. She spoke of her late husband, the pressures of maintaining appearances, and the loneliness that often accompanied her status. Jack, too, began to reveal snippets of his life, his hardships, his journey as a gardener, and the dreams he once harbored that had been buried beneath the weight of responsibility and loss. In those moments, Clara felt a bond forming between them, a connection that transcended their vastly different backgrounds. She was growing fond of Jack, his authenticity drawing her in like a moth to a flame. Yet, even as warmth spread through her chest, a flicker of guilt accompanied it. She couldn't shake the feeling that her emotional attachment to him was inappropriate, especially in the face of her family crisis. Here she was, a woman burdened by grief, finding solace in the company of a man she had barely known. It felt wrong, and yet it felt so right. As they sat together in the dim light of the living room, Clara felt a sense of clarity wash over her. She was at a crossroads, grappling with the duality of her life, the wealth and privilege that defined her existence and the raw, human connection that was burgeoning in her heart. She realized that perhaps it was not wrong to seek comfort in someone who understood her struggles, someone who was not entangled in the expectations that had suffocated her for so long. But as the night wore on, The reality of Lily's condition loomed large in her mind, a relentless reminder that life was fragile and fleeting. Clara knew that she would have to confront her feelings for Jack, to navigate this intricate web of emotions while keeping her focus on her granddaughter's well-being. The guilt lingered, a constant companion in her thoughts, but so too did a sense of hope. A hope that perhaps, in the midst of chaos, she could find not only healing for Lily but also a new sense of purpose for herself. Clara sat in the waiting room of the hospital, her heart racing as she gazed at the sterile environment, the bright fluorescent lights casting a harsh glow on her thoughts. The air was thick with tension, punctuated only by the distant beeping of machines and the murmurs of concerned family members. Her daughter, Rachel, had arrived first, her face pale and anxious. She paced the small space, her phone clutched tightly in her hand, waiting for updates about Lily. Clara felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her, a heavy shroud of uncertainty and fear enveloping them all. Soon, the rest of the family trickled in, each one wearing a mask of worry that mirrored Clara's own. The room buzzed with hushed conversations and speculative glances as they discussed the grim reality of Lily's condition. Clara's heart ached at the thought of her granddaughter, a bright light in their lives, now trapped in a hospital bed surrounded by medical equipment. The doctors had explained the situation simply enough. Lily needed a bone marrow transplant, and time was of the essence. The urgency of the matter hung in the air, thick and suffocating, as they all grappled with the reality of what lay ahead. As Clara listened to her family, she felt a familiar tension rise within her. They debated potential donors, discussing who among them might be a match, tossing around names like pieces on a chessboard. The conversations were laced with unspoken expectations and unyielding pressure. Clara's mind wandered, reflecting on her own life, her own struggles, and the stark contrast between her wealth and the vulnerability of her granddaughter's situation. It seemed as if the money that had once shielded her from hardship now served only to amplify her helplessness. Rachel turned to her, her voice tense and urgent, asking if Clara knew anyone who might be a suitable donor outside the family. Clara felt a pang of guilt. She had been so absorbed in her own grief and sense of loss that she hadn't thought to reach out for help. Would she have the heart to ask Jack, the gardener who had unexpectedly entered her life? The thought was fleeting, but it lingered, a whisper in the back of her mind. As the hours stretched on, Clara became acutely aware of the judgmental gazes of her relatives. They no doubt saw her as the wealthy matriarch, expected to have all the answers, the resources, and the connections to make everything right. Yet, she felt like an imposter, an outsider in her own family, trapped in a gilded cage of expectations that she could no longer bear. The pressure to maintain her status, her image, weighed down on her like an anchor. When the doctors finally emerged, Clara felt a rush of hope, only to be met with the harsh reality of their words. They spoke of the urgency, the need for a match, and how time was slipping away. Each word felt like a blow, and Clara struggled to keep her composure in front of her family. She nodded along, trying to process the information, her mind racing with thoughts of what could happen if they didn't find a match in time. The world outside the hospital felt distant and irrelevant, a stark contrast to the life and death stakes inside. As the family continued to discuss their options, Clara's thoughts drifted back to Jack. He had shown her kindness during her darkest moments, offering comfort when she needed it most. She remembered how he had listened without judgment, how he had shared bits of his own story, revealing his own struggles. It was a connection she hadn't realized she craved until he had come into her life. But could she really ask him to do something so monumental? To risk his health for a child he barely knew? Clara felt a wave of conflicting emotions wash over her. Gratitude for Jack's presence in her life, guilt for even considering asking him for such a sacrifice, and fear of what it would mean for her heart if she opened that door. She was already struggling with her attachment to him, and the thought of involving him in her family's tragedy felt like a betrayal. After a night spent in a restless haze, Clara was surprised when she heard a soft knock on her door the following morning. It was Jack, standing there with an expression of concern etched across his face. He had come to check on her, to see how she was holding up. Clara felt a rush of warmth at his presence, a soothing balm amid the chaos. Sitting together in the quiet of her living room, Clara found herself recounting the events of the previous day. The frantic calls, the discussions about potential donors, the urgency of Lily's condition. She felt a sense of relief in sharing her burden, even if just for a moment. Jack listened intently, his eyes reflecting a depth of understanding that made her heart flutter. When she finished, Jack took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into unknown waters. Clara watched him, a mixture of hope and trepidation swirling within her. He spoke softly, his voice steady and calm, revealing that he had been thinking about Lily, about the situation, and that he wanted to help. Clara felt her heart leap at his words, but a part of her pulled back, cautious and wary. Jack surprised her further by offering to get tested as a bone marrow donor. The sincerity in his voice struck Clara like a lightning bolt, and for a moment, time stood still. She had never imagined he would willingly put himself in such a position, and yet here he was, offering a lifeline to her family. It filled her with a mixture of awe and confusion. In that moment, Clara realized how little she truly knew about Jack, despite their growing bond. What drove him to make such a significant offer? What was he willing to sacrifice for a child he barely knew? Her heart swelled with gratitude, yet it was accompanied by a gnawing worry about what this meant for their relationship. As they sat in silence, the weight of the decision hung heavily in the air between them. Clara felt a shift in their dynamic, a deepening of their connection that she couldn't quite articulate. She was grateful, yes, but also conflicted. The line between friendship and something more had begun to blur, and now, with this monumental act of kindness looming on the horizon, she felt herself teetering on the edge of something profound. Days passed, filled with anxious anticipation as they awaited the test results. Clara found herself torn between hope and fear, her thoughts often drifting to Jack and what this could mean for them both. She often caught herself glancing at her phone, half expecting a message from him, but it never came. Instead, she felt the echoes of their shared moments reverberate within her, reminding her that perhaps there was something more waiting to be uncovered. When the results finally arrived, Clara was unable to contain her nervous energy. She paced the floor of her lavish home, the opulence surrounding her feeling starkly out of place against the gravity of the news they were about to receive. She could hardly concentrate on anything else, her mind racing with possibilities and the implications of what would follow. Finally, the call came. Clara held her breath as she answered, her heart pounding in her chest. The doctor's voice was steady, and as he delivered the news, Clara felt a rush of emotions flood through her. Jack was a perfect match. Relief washed over her like a tidal wave, but alongside it came a wave of conflicting feelings. She was grateful beyond measure, yet the reality of what Jack was willing to do began to settle heavily on her heart. Clara knew this was a turning point, not just for Lily, but for her and Jack as well. The bond they shared had deepened, and with this revelation, it was clear that their paths were intertwined in ways she had never anticipated. But as her heart swelled with gratitude, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that this journey would lead them both into uncharted territory, where their pasts and futures would collide in ways they could not yet fathom. In that moment, as Clara stood on the precipice of a new chapter, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps amidst the darkness, there was light. Possibilities waiting to unfold, connections waiting to be discovered. As she looked out the window at the world beyond, Clara realized that change was inevitable, and with it came the opportunity for healing, redemption, and perhaps even love. As the donation process began, the atmosphere in the hospital was imbued with a sense of urgency and hope. Clara paced the waiting room, her mind racing with conflicting emotions. She was grateful, undeniably grateful, that Jack had stepped forward to help her family in their time of crisis. Yet, a nagging apprehension crept into her thoughts. The sheer magnitude of what Jack was about to undergo weighed heavily on her conscience. She had known him only as the gardener who had inadvertently become a lifeline, a comforting presence amidst the chaos of her granddaughter's illness. Now, he was willingly sacrificing a part of himself for a child he barely knew, and the depth of that selflessness left her feeling both humbled and burdened. Clara found herself reflecting on the life she had led before the storm of grief and uncertainty had swept through her world. As a billionaire, she had navigated a realm defined by lavish parties, business deals, and social expectations. Yet, in her heart, she had always yearned for genuine connections, something that often felt elusive amidst the glittering facades of wealth. Jack represented a slice of authenticity, a refreshing contrast to the superficial relationships she had cultivated over the years. She had shared more with him in their brief interactions than she had with many of her so-called friends over the past decade. In the sterile waiting room, with its muted colors and uncomfortable chairs, Clara's thoughts turned to Jack's motivations. What drove a man like him to step into the fray when others would shy away? She remembered the moment he had volunteered for the bone marrow test, the determination in his eyes that spoke volumes. He had not hesitated, not even for a second, despite the potential risks involved. It was a testament to his character, a character forged through hardship and suffering, she surmised. She wished she could know more about him, understand the layers of his story that had remained hidden beneath the surface. Meanwhile, in a different part of the hospital, Jack was preparing for the procedure. The starkness of the room, with its bright lights and sterile instruments, contrasted sharply with the serenity he had felt in Clara's garden. There, amidst the flowers and greenery, he had found a sense of peace, a brief respite from the trials of his past. Now, as he lay on the hospital bed, he could feel the weight of his decision pressing down on him. The doctors explained the process, their voices a distant hum as he wrestled with his own thoughts. Jack's mind wandered back to the years that had shaped him into the man he was today. He thought of the struggles he had faced, the job losses, the family estrangement, the loneliness that had seeped into his bones. But amid those struggles, he had also found purpose. The moment he had learned about Lily's condition, something inside him had stirred. This was not just a chance to help. It was an opportunity to atone for the mistakes of his past, to stand up and do something meaningful when it mattered most. He remembered the kindness Clara's late husband had shown him many years ago. Back then, he had been a young man, drowning in despair, and it was her husband who had extended a hand, offering guidance and support during one of the darkest times of his life. Jack had vowed never to forget that act of kindness, and now, as he prepared to give a piece of himself to save Clara's granddaughter, he felt as though he was fulfilling an unspoken promise. This was his chance to repay the debt of gratitude he had carried in his heart for so long. As the minutes ticked by, Clara found herself struggling with her thoughts. She longed to be by Jack's side, to reassure him that he was not alone in this endeavor. She wished she could convey to him the enormity of her appreciation, the depth of her feelings toward him. She wanted him to understand that his choice was not just an act of charity. It was a profound gesture of humanity that would forever alter the trajectory of their lives. With every passing moment, Clara's heart swelled with admiration for Jack. She envisioned the two of them, once strangers from vastly different worlds, now bound together by a shared purpose that transcended the boundaries of class and status. In that sterile waiting room, surrounded by the hum of medical machinery, Clara began to grasp the significance of their connection. It was as if fate had conspired to weave their lives together, each thread representing a choice, a sacrifice, a moment of courage. As the clock inched closer to the scheduled surgery time, Clara's thoughts shifted to her granddaughter. She imagined Lily's laughter, the way her eyes sparkled with mischief and joy. It pained her to think that such a vibrant spirit was now confined to a hospital bed, fighting for her life. Clara's heart ached with the weight of despair, but it was also buoyed by hope. Jack's willingness to donate his marrow was a flicker of light in the darkness, a promise of a brighter future for Lily. In the operating room, Jack closed his eyes as the anesthesia began to take effect. His last conscious thought was of Clara and the gratitude that filled his heart. He hoped that his sacrifice would not only save Lily, but also bring Clara some semblance of peace in the aftermath of loss. He wanted her to know that she was not alone, that he was there, a steady presence in a tumultuous sea. As Clara sat in the waiting room, time seemed to stretch and contract in a surreal dance. Each minute felt like an eternity, yet she was acutely aware of the fleeting nature of life. She thought of all the moments she had taken for granted, the laughter shared with family, the simple joys of gardening, and the warmth of human connection. She realized that her life had been a series of choices, some made out of obligation, others from a place of authenticity. In this moment, she understood that her relationship with Jack was a choice she wanted to embrace fully, a connection that had emerged from the ashes of her grief. In the quiet of the waiting room, Clara allowed herself to dream of a future where she and Jack could explore the depths of their bond, where they could share their stories and heal together. She envisioned the possibility of new beginnings, of laughter echoing through her home once more. Jack had entered her life as a gardener, a helper in a time of need, but he had grown into something much more, a partner in the truest sense of the word. The surgery was a pivotal moment, not just for Lily but for Clara and Jack as well. It was a testament to the power of sacrifice, the strength of the human spirit, and the unexpected connections that could arise from the most challenging circumstances. As Clara waited, she felt a sense of resolve wash over her. She would not let fear dictate her future. Instead, she would embrace the unknown, ready to face whatever lay ahead alongside Jack. In that hospital, amidst uncertainty, Clara found a flicker of hope, a promise of a brighter tomorrow, forged through love, sacrifice, and an unbreakable bond. Clara sat in the waiting room, the sterile scent of antiseptic mingling with the faint hum of fluorescent lights above. Her heart was a tumultuous sea of emotions. The relief of knowing that Lily's surgery had gone successfully was tinged with an underlying current of anxiety. She stared at the wall, her mind racing with thoughts of Jack, the man who had stepped into their lives like a beacon of hope. He had been there for her family in their darkest hour, and a part of her wanted to reach out and thank him again, even if it felt inadequate to express the depth of her gratitude. As she reflected on the past few days, memories surged. The moments of despair mingled with unexpected joy. Jack's selfless decision to donate his bone marrow had saved Lily, but it had also unearthed a connection that Clara had never anticipated. The hospital staff had been busy preparing for post-surgery care when a nurse, filled with warmth, approached Clara with a peculiar expression. The nurse had mentioned, almost casually, that Jack was once a childhood friend of her late husband. Those words reverberated in Clara's mind. How could she have not known? What other secrets had been buried beneath the surface of their intertwined lives? Clara's heart raced as she waited for Jack to arrive. The revelation had ignited a flame of curiosity and concern within her. She needed to confront Jack, to understand the implications of this hidden past. It was not just about the man who had saved her granddaughter. It was about the man who had been part of her husband's life. The very fabric of her understanding of both men was about to unravel, and she felt an unsettling mix of dread and anticipation. When Jack finally entered the waiting room, there was a palpable shift in the atmosphere. Clara's gaze locked onto him, the tension in the air thickening. He looked weary yet relieved, the lines around his eyes deepening as he approached her. In that moment, Clara saw not just the gardener who had inadvertently become part of her family, but also a man who had once shared laughter and dreams with her late husband. She could sense the weight of their shared history pressing down on him as he took a seat beside her. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken words. Clara's heart pounded as she wrestled with her thoughts. She had wanted to thank him, to express her gratitude, but now all she could think about was the question that hung in the air like a storm cloud. Why had he distanced himself from her family? Why had he kept this secret for so long? Taking a deep breath, she finally broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack turned to her, his expression shifting from relief to concern. He must have sensed the gravity of her thoughts. Clara's heart raced as she pressed forward, demanding answers. She needed to know why he had kept this crucial piece of information hidden. Jack's gaze dropped to the floor, and Clara could see the turmoil etched on his face. The moment stretched into an eternity as he seemed to grapple with the words that would follow. Clara felt a surge of compassion for him. He had just put his life on the line for her granddaughter, yet there was a chasm of unspoken pain that separated them. She could see he was reliving memories, and the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. He finally looked up, his eyes filled with a profound sadness. In that moment, Clara was struck by the depth of his vulnerability. Jack shared how, After her husband's death, he had feared that revealing his past would only bring more pain to Clara. His voice was steady, but Clara could hear the tremor of emotion beneath it. He had distanced himself from her family not out of shame, but out of a desire to protect her. It was a selfless act that had inadvertently created a wall between them, and now Clara felt that wall beginning to crumble. As Jack recounted his memories of Clara's husband, she listened intently. He spoke of their youthful days filled with laughter and ambition, of the bond they had forged while navigating the trials and tribulations of life. Jack had been there for her husband during some of the hardest moments, a friend who had witnessed the peaks and valleys of his journey. It was a friendship that had seen both men through their darkest hours, yet, as life often does, it had frayed at the edges, leading Jack to fade from the scene. Clara's heart ached as she listened. She could see the pain etched in Jack's features, the burden of his decision weighing heavily on him. He had kept his distance to spare her the discomfort of his struggles, yet in doing so, he had inadvertently created a chasm that neither of them had known how to bridge. She felt a surge of understanding wash over her, recognizing the depth of his sacrifice, the layers of complexity surrounding their lives. As the conversation unfolded, the pieces of their shared history began to align, revealing a tapestry woven with threads of both joy and sorrow. Clara realized that in saving Lily, Jack had not only fulfilled a promise made long ago, but had also offered her a second chance, a chance to rediscover the connections that had been lost in the wake of grief. In the moments that followed, Clara found herself reaching out, bridging the gap that had once seemed insurmountable. She spoke of her husband's kindness, of the way he had always believed in second chances. Together, they began to navigate the landscape of their shared past, finding solace in the memories that connected them. Jack spoke of the challenges he faced, of the struggles that had shaped him into the man he was today. Clara listened, offering empathy and understanding, the weight of their burdens slowly lifting as they shared their truths. As they sat in the quiet aftermath of their revelations, Clara felt a sense of empowerment blossoming within her. She was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a woman discovering her strength, a woman ready to embrace the future. Jack, too, seemed transformed, the shadows of his past slowly receding as he found a sense of belonging that he had thought lost forever. The bond they shared had deepened, enriched by the knowledge of their intertwined histories. In the days that followed, Clara's family began to see Jack in a new light. Initially skeptical, they witnessed the genuine connection between him and Clara, the respect and understanding that had blossomed out of shared experiences and sacrifices. Jack's character shone through, and Clara felt a sense of pride in standing beside him. No longer just the gardener, he had become a vital part of their lives, a man who had shown immense courage and compassion in the face of adversity. Clara emerged from this tumultuous period not only as a woman shaped by loss, but as one ready to embrace the complexities of life. She understood that the journey ahead would not be easy. It would require vulnerability, strength, and the willingness to face whatever came next. But she was ready to walk that path, hand in hand with Jack, who had become more than just a friend. He was a partner, a kindred spirit who had shared in her pain and joy. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the hospital, Clara looked at Jack beside her. Their lives had intertwined in ways neither had expected, and the future, once clouded by sorrow, now shimmered with possibilities. Together, they faced the dawn of a new chapter, ready to embrace the journey that lay ahead, bound by the threads of their shared history and the hope of a brighter tomorrow.